Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, scratch beneath the surface of any big political story in Britain, and you will find a Rupert Murdoch angle. And so it is with the Scottish referendum. The LA Times has some explaining to do about how one of its reporters ran his copy by the CIA before it went into print. We look at what goes on at the obituary desk before the obit goes into print. And self-described selfie-holics.
I took this photograph with the caption, "My office for the day,"
in our web video of the week. Oftentimes, when we examine coverage of stories about people facing a vote, a choice between independence or the status quo, the news media divide and narratives compete. Scotland is facing such a vote September 18th. The thing about this story is, even though the referendum has been on the cards for months, there was a presumption that Scots would vote no and preserve a relationship with Britain that goes back more than 3 centuries. Then came a poll showing the yes side slightly ahead. Party leaders in London hit the panic button and the media scrambled to play catch-up. That poll came out in the Sunday Times, which, as it happens, is owned by Rupert Murdoch and his gigantic news corporation. And there is every indication that Murdoch's Scottish Sun, the most widely read paper north of the border, will soon be urging Scots to vote for independence. So despite that phone hacking scandal that shamed his company, landed it in court, and left it in crisis, Rupert Murdoch could prove to be more influential in this referendum than almost any of those actually taking part. The leader of the yes side, Alex Salmond, is clearly happy to have Murdoch's backing, but then so was David Cameron, who Murdoch helped get into number 10 Downing Street. And we all saw how that worked out. Our starting point this week is the Scottish capital, Edinburgh.
Rupert Murdoch likes to stir things up. He's no lover of the British establishment, and Parliament in particular, since Leveson inquiry.
I'm never asked the Prime Minister for anything.
And this is an opportunity that he has to stick one to in Westminster and the British establishment. And the notion of Scotland breaking away from the United Kingdom is probably one that gives him a certain frisson of pleasure.
Some news stories are slow burners. This referendum campaign was one of them. It began almost 4 months ago, but this past week the story moved from cruise control to panic mode.
It's got to be.
All it took was one news article on a poll that had the pro-independence side ahead for the first time to change everything for the politicians involved and the journalists covering them.
The London papers certainly panicked after the poll. Panic is maybe the wrong word. I think they reflected the panic in the London establishment after the poll because nobody expected the vote to be so close. They thought that it would be an easy win for the no campaign, and there was genuine surprise among the London papers.
There was never going to, the assumption was the earthquake was never going to happen. The status quo would continue. What we've actually seen is actually all of those assumptions have been effectively worthless because all of a sudden we are faced with a major story. And when major stories happen, newspapers throw resources at it, they throw pages at it, they throw end-to-end analysis at it. 18 months ago this wasn't a story, a year ago this wasn't a story, 3 months ago this wasn't a story. It is now.
The 2 biggest media players in Britain are the BBC, the world's largest broadcaster, and Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, which controls almost 40% of the newspaper market, and Britain's biggest privately owned broadcaster, Sky B. Murdoch's Scottish Sun, a tabloid, reaches more readers than any other paper in Scotland. But it was his Sunday Times in London that published that poll September 7th, the first to show the yes side out front. Murdoch had tweeted that the poll was coming and seemed to delight in the news. The following day, however, the Sunday Times' sister paper featured a story on the economic downside of a potential yes vote.
I think both stories are valid in themselves, and it's perfectly proper for a newspaper to run stories that give us different perspectives on the same campaign. The poll was a game changer. We have politicians coming north today bringing journalists in their wake. who probably wouldn't have been coming to Scotland today had it not been for that poll. So that poll itself is an extremely newsworthy one. The Sunday Times didn't put any interpretation on the poll in terms of saying this is a rather good thing and more people should vote yes. They simply reported the poll. And the economic difficulties or problems or issues around independence are also a valid story to run. So there's nothing wrong with the newspaper giving both perspectives on the debate, and I just wish there had been more of it.
Rupert Murdoch was tweeting on the Saturday before the results of the poll were announced about how it would send shockwaves through the British establishment, which was clearly an idea which gave him some enjoyment. He owns The Sun, which is the biggest selling tabloid daily newspaper in Scotland now, and as such, from the Yes campaign's point of view, there's no arguing that having a tabloid of that nature on their side would be an advantage to them, and they would welcome that, definitely.
Why this particular intervention at this particular time? I would think it's got a lot to do with what's happening to News International titles in the UK, heavily criticised by the government. 2 of his senior editors on trial, one of them found guilty, one of them found not guilty in the middle of the phone hacking scandal, being criticised by politicians, Labour, Conservative, the Liberal Democrats, right across the board. Now all of a sudden, is this Rupert Murdoch's kickback? Is this his attempt to show people that he still can be a kingmaker? So don't forget me, is what he's probably saying here.
Since the BBC is publicly funded, its journalism is constantly put under the microscope. And this past week, the leader of the Yes campaign couched his language, but suggested the BBC was part of a dirty tricks campaign from the No side.
Because I have here a screen grab from the BBC last night.
The story was about an unnamed government official in London telling the BBC that a bank, RBS, had discussed moving its registered office in Scotland to London in the event of a yes vote. Alex Salmond said leaking such market-sensitive information was illegal. He called for an investigation and took a shot at the BBC.
And therefore I know the BBC, in its impartial role as a public sector broadcaster, will give full cooperation to that investigation.
Unlike most publicly funded broadcasters, the BBC is not paid for directly by the government. It survives on licensing fees paid annually by individuals. Therefore, it has a big stake in a referendum that could shrink the BBC's funding base.
The BBC has a strong interest in Scotland remaining part of UK. It would lose 5 million viewers. It would lose £200 million. I think there's also another danger for the BBC round the corner, in the sense that if you take out 57 Scottish MPs, 56 of those MPs belong to centre-left parties. Now, that makes the chances of a Conservative government in the rest of the UK much higher. And the Conservatives are pushing to reduce the licence fee, to privatise some aspects of the BBC's work, and generally reduce the BBC's influence. So, I think the BBC's got a strong vested interest in Scotland remaining in the UK. Nevertheless, I don't think its coverage has reflected that.
There is, however, something about the way the BBC treat, respectively, the Westminster and Scottish politicians. I think there was an assumption that if you had one Labour representative, one Tory representative, one Lib Dem representative and one SNP representative, job done. That was the balance. And because that was looking at it through the prism of party politics and general election coverage. But this isn't a general election, and that combination of politicians that I've described isn't a balanced combination, because 3 of those politicians are anti-independence and only 1 is for independence. So in the referendum context, that isn't the correct balance, and I think that wasn't immediately apparent to some people in the BBC. I think that's changed recently.
My rule as a new political journalist for a long time has always been that if you get criticised from both sides, you can't be doing too badly. And the BBC has been accused by the Yes campaign of being too pro-union. There have even been protests. I think they picketed, some activists picketed the BBC headquarters in Glasgow. And yet, after the second debate, the No campaign was up in arms, saying that the BBC hadn't chosen the audience fairly for the second debate and that it was packed with nationalists. So if they're getting it from both sides, under my old rule, they can't be doing it too badly.
At stake in this referendum is a political union stretching back to the year 1707, when Scotland and England united and the ancient term King of Scots fell into disuse. Even if the country does vote yes, there is no new king in its future. What it may have, however, in an Australian-born media mogul of Scottish ancestry named Murdoch, is a new kingmaker. Our Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the Scottish referendum.
There has been a lot of media coverage. However, it's been bordering on hysteria. More recently, it's been more of a personality competition. And I'm sick of reading all the twaddle that goes with it. What we need are the actual ramifications for ourselves as individuals and for the rest of the UK in the case of Scottish independence. Also, I've found that news outlets have been very loaded on either side, making it quite off-putting for anyone to come in with a balanced point of view.
I wish there had been a stronger coverage from the outset. In the last 2 weeks, obviously there's been a drive towards it, but that capitalises on the end, that last momentum. Social media has definitely been alive for both camps, but I do feel that there should have been more from the powerhouses.
It's time now for Listening Post News Bites. A series of emails has exposed a cozy relationship between the Los Angeles Times' former national security reporter and the agency he was supposed to be covering, the CIA. The report was published by The Intercept. That's the new news outlet funded by eBay founder Pierre Omidyar. It said that reporter Ken Delanian routinely sent his articles to CIA public affairs officers prior to publication. He would explicitly promise positive coverage and in some cases would change copy at their request. The emails detail collaboration on stories about drone strikes, the agency's dealings with director Catherine Bigelow regarding her film Zero Dark 30, and the CIA's work in Yemen. The notes were all written in 2012 and were acquired through a Freedom of Information request. Delanian, now an intelligence reporter at the Associated Press, has since called it a bad idea, saying, "I shouldn't have done it, and I wouldn't do it now, but it had no meaningful impact on the outcome of the stories." The LA Times, though, calls it a clear violation of its editorial guidelines and has distanced itself from the journalist. A spokesman at the AP had a different take. "We were satisfied," he said, "that any pre-publication exchanges that Ken had with the CIA before joining AP were in pursuit of accuracy in his reporting on intelligence matters." Beijing's trumpeted anti-corruption drive is making its way through the Chinese media and claiming some high-profile casualties. The latest to be swept up in it are 6 journalists at a leading financial news website, 21cbh.com, all arrested on extortion charges. They were taken into custody September 3rd, accused of trying to extort money from companies in return for favorable coverage. According to a report by the state-owned news outlet Xinhua, if companies did not cooperate, the news outlet would release negative reports maliciously attacking them and blackmail them into signing advertising deals. 2 months ago, the anti-corruption crackdown led to the removal of one of China's best-known talking heads. Gui Zhanggang was yanked from the anchor chair of a business show on state-owned CCTV. He's reported to be under investigation. That followed the arrest of his boss, the head of CCTV's financial news channel, Guo Shenghe, for allegedly accepting bribes. Political protesters in Pakistan are still on the streets, and they continue to target media outlets they don't like, primarily GOTV. As we reported last week, the demonstrators are led by opposition MP Imran Khan and want Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to quit. GOTV has called their movement undemocratic, and on September 7th, protesters pelted GO's building in Islamabad with stones, shattering windows and attacking staff. They previously went after the state-owned channel PTV, temporarily infiltrating the building and knocking it off the air. The International Federation of Journalists has weighed in, saying the repeated attacks on GO News clearly show that the anti-government demonstrators are intolerant of the media's role in reporting these events and are resorting to unjustifiable, undemocratic acts. The attacks on GO represent an attack on Pakistan's media as a whole. Demonstrators have since come out in support of the network, with rallies held in Lahore, Peshawar, and Islamabad. They call it working the graveyard shift, working at the one desk in the newsroom that editors check in with whenever somebody famous checks out. We're talking about the newspaper's obituary desk. Those extended obits don't get written after somebody dies, they're already on file. The obit desk is supposed to have them ready at a moment's notice, and it's not as though the only obits ready to go are about newsmakers who are elderly. It doesn't matter how old you are. A good obit editor is supposed to be prepared for anything. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on obituary writing, the do's and don'ts of the craft.
It's journalism's open, morbid secret that news organizations around the world have thousands of pre-written obituaries on file, just waiting for when the time comes.
Preparation is key in obits, and so we do have many obituaries, at least in some stage of pre-writing.
We do try to write as many as we can in advance. We have right now about 1,500 on file. You keep trying to stay ahead of Father Time, and you can't. People are going to die at most unexpected times.
What happens often, though, is people themselves or their friends, and loved ones will contact us and say, my father or, this colleague is not well, you might want to prepare something. So it's usually a basis of negotiation, but it would be very rare for us to ring up, one half of the couple and say, I hear your husband's not very well. Can we have a quick chat?
The people who go into our morgue, as we call it, never seem to die. We've had Castro in there. I find that if you do an obit in advance, it's a guarantee of eternal life.
The advantage of having pre-written obituaries on file is that news organizations can publish them quickly and accurately, or so they hope. That wasn't the case for the New York Times. When American news anchor Walter Cronkite died in 2009, the newspaper's report needed 7 corrections after publication, an obituary-related record for the 161-year-old paper. Still, pre-written obituaries are common practice for Western news organizations, but in certain parts of the Arab world, being prepared could land an obituary writer in trouble.
The last 50, 60 years, there were dictatorships, and dictatorships actually, death is not on the card. There's no process of succession when the dictator dies, therefore they don't think about it. And because most of the newspapers, they have very strong censorship, the intelligence services or the security service will be having spies there. So no one suggests that the leader might die, let's actually keep it on file, is a taboo.
After the 9/11 attacks, President George W. Bush made the fate of Osama bin Laden pretty clear.
Said wanted, dead or alive.
So when President Obama announced that the leader of Al-Qaeda had been killed, it's unlikely there was an obituaries editor in the world who hadn't given some thought to what they would say about the man.
We started writing it right after 9/11, and by some strange intuition, I can't tell you, but 2 or 3 weeks before he actually was killed, it got into my mind that I should maybe look at this one with no advanced information. It's what I do. I have to think about people like this. We were fortunate to have something substantially ready like that. We had about 5,000-word obit all ready to go.
Of course, he was in hiding. He really wasn't doing a lot for the last years of his life, which for an obituary editor it helps you to relax. You didn't have to change his obituary for years. You just then had to add the circumstances and the nature of his death, a couple of paragraphs at the end of the piece, read it through, and pretty much you hoped you were there.
I got into quite a bit of trouble because I insisted on finding out about the life of the man. I talked about his love of eating yogurt and honey and how he would take his children to the beach and how he would go hunting on Fridays on a horse. And the Americans among our readers were furious about this and said, you should just have condemned him. Why are you trying to tell us these things about him? This man is just a monster.
Pre-writing the obituary of someone who spent 12 years on the FBI's most wanted list is one thing. But it's something else entirely when your subject is a pop star and is just 26 years old. In 2008, it emerged that the Associated Press had prepared an obituary for the then troubled American singer Britney Spears. The news caused quite a stir.
I think it's rather bad form to make that public. I dare say there are many people alive who've got their obits on file, and quite a lot of young ones too. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but I think it's bad form and bad taste to announce it.
With someone like Amy Winehouse, who perhaps equivalent situation of a young pop star who had troubles with addictions, that it would have been very unlikely that my colleagues in other papers didn't have an obituary prepared. Is that callous, or is that just being reasonable and prepared for our jobs? I wouldn't announce it, but it would be no surprise to me if many other young troubled stars have prepared obits.
Dealing with an untimely death is a sensitive issue, but so is characterizing an unscrupulously lived life, which is why obituary writers tend to write in code and readers need to read between the lines.
Euphemisms in obituaries is a traditional part of the way we write, has been for a long time, and so classically people would say, oh, he was a bon vivant when he was a terrible drunk, or didn't take fools gladly when he was an absolute beast. So the point of obituaries is that they're not anodyne tributes, constantly writing about the good side of people. You have to give readers an idea of whether someone's nice or nasty and give them a sense of the rough with the smooth, and euphemisms have been about that.
When Lucien Freud, the artist, died, this is not quite a euphemism, but it made me laugh. The obituary ended up, he left many children. Now, usually an obituary ends up by saying he leaves, you know, a widow and 2 daughters or 3 sons. But of course, Lucien Freud was a well-known philanderer and had multiple mistresses. So this was a way of making the same point again in the last line of the obituary. It was a very neat little remark.
Euphemisms may help to convey character flaws to the reader, but they don't change the fact that the writer has to deal with death on a daily basis. But it's not as macabre as it may appear.
Quite a lot of obituaries are colorfully written, and you have quite sort of sometimes the amusing part of it. Nowadays, with newspaper actually competing with tabloids, you have to inject a bit of humor, even in an obituary.
We really don't dwell on their deaths. The deaths is the news peg, you might say, and it really comprises 1 paragraph, perhaps, maybe more, in a story. We're mainly interested in talking about their lives.
We are dealing with the achievements that those people have made during the course of their lives, and that is very uplifting.
It may be the last word on a life, but it's the start of a legacy. And the next time you flip to the obituaries page of your newspaper, that's worth remembering.
More Global Village Voices now on the art of the obituary.
All pre-written obituaries need to be protected. Why? Well, there's always the danger that they could be released early, before the individual's death. This has happened in a number of cases. If you'll think back, you probably remember that Bob Hope's obituary was released before his death. Had everybody all in an uproar, and all of a sudden someone checked and said, no, he's still in the hospital, he's not dead.
Social media offer the capability and the expectation that news, like obituaries, will be instantaneous. So now there's even more of a need that obituaries be well written and prepared and ready in advance. Because we can be informed when we read an accurate obituary, but even more than that, we can be inspired when we read an obituary that is a compelling story of a life.
Finally, it's been said that with all the phone cameras out there now, more pictures have been taken in the past 2 years than in the preceding 190 years. That's the entire history of photography. Too bad so many of them are selfies. If Narcissus were alive today, he would be all over Instagram. Let's face it, it's a disease, and viral video comics Trip and Tyler think it's time for a little rehab. Selfies Anonymous is our web video of the week. We hope you find it therapeutic. And we'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
So what I'd like everyone to do is to take out your most recent photo that you posted, and as an exercise, I want you to give me an honest caption.
This is what my family is like 4% of the time.
Hi, my name's Amy, and I'm also a selfie-holic.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Amy.
I've posted a picture of my Louis Vuitton bag, and my Marc Jacobs bag, and my Chloe bag, along with my outfit of the day for the past, 6 months.
Double tap.
Ew.
Good, I just posted.
Awesome.
Why did you really take that picture, Tyler?
I just feel like if I show everyone how much I travel, they'll think I'm more important than I really am. Case in point.
It's practically impossible to resist when you're in a window seat.
Yeah, I took this photograph with the caption, "My office for the day." And the photo I posted before that, "My office for the day."
Look, we're all trying to feel important. I mean, I only use profile pictures where I have a microphone and there's stage lighting.
I was trying to take a picture of my watch, but I didn't realize my front-facing camera was on.
Paul, why were you trying to take a picture of your watch?
It's a fitness watch. I was trying to show my running stats.
Well, at least you didn't use the Kelvin filter again.
Yeah, I'm on kind of a Valencia kick now.
Early bird.
Sutro. Lo-fi.
X Pro 2.
Don't need one.
I just use normal.
I'm proud of you. It's a step.
Took a picture of a quote, and I posted it.
Carlos, Instagram is not really the place for that, all right? You're thinking of Twitter, right?